heat is everywhere now. I can't ignore it anymore. The air is like a furnace blast so hot that my eyes under the goggles feel cool compared to the rest of my face. My hands are cool, but the gloves have big black spots from perspiration and the back surrounded by white streaks of dried salt. On the road, a crow tugs on some carrion and flies away slowly as we approach. It looks like a lizard on the road, dry and stuck to the tar. On the horizon appears an image of buildings shimmering slightly. I look down at the map and figure it must be Bowman. I think about the ice, water, and air conditioning. On the street and sidewalks of Bowman, we see almost no one, even though plenty of parked cars show they're here, all inside. We swing the machines into an angled parking place with a tight turn that points them outward for when they're ready to go. A lone elderly person in a broad-brimmed hat watches us put the cycles in the stands and remove the helmets and goggles. "Hot enough for you?" he asks, his expression blank. John shakes his head and says, "God." The expression shaded by the hat becomes almost a smile. "What is the temperature?" John asks. 102, he says. "Last I saw, should go to 104. He asks us how far we've come, and we tell him, and he nods sort of approval. "It's a long way," he says, and he asks about the machines. The beer and air conditioning are calling, but we don't break away. We just stand there in the 102 sun, talking to this person. He's a stockman, retired, says it's pretty much ranch country around here, and he used to own a Henderson cycle years ago. It pleases me that he should want to talk about his Henderson in this 102 sun. We talk about it for a while with the growing impatience from John and Sylvia and Chris, and when we finally say goodbye, he says he is glad to have met us, and his expression is still blank, but we have a sense that he really meant it. He walks away with a kind of slow dignity in 102 sun. In the restaurant, I try to comment on this, but no one is interested. John and Sylvia look really out of it. They just sit and soak up air-conditioned air without a move. The waitress comes up for an order, and that snaps them out of it a little, but they're not ready, so she goes away again. "I don't think I want to leave here," Sylvia says. An image of the elderly man outside in the wide-brim hat comes back to me. Think what it was like around here before air conditioning, I say. "I am," she says. With the roads this hot and that back bad back tire of mine, we shouldn't go any more than 60, I say. No comment from them. Chris, in contrast to them, seems to be back to his normal self, alert and watching everything. When the food comes, he wolfs it down, and then before half finished, asks for more. He gets it, and we wait for him to finish. Miles later, and the heat is just ferocious. Sunglasses and goggles are not enough for this glare. You need a welder's mask. The high plains break up into washed out and gullied hills. It is all bright, whitish tan. Not a blade of grass anywhere, just scattered weed stalks and rocks and sand. The black of the highway is a relief to look at, so I stare down at it and study how the blur whizzes by underfoot. Beside it I see the left exhaust pipe has picked up a bluer color than it has ever had before. I spit in my glove tips, touch it, and can see the sizzle. Not good. It's important now to just live with this and not fight it mentally. Mind control. I should talk now about Phaedrus's knife. It'll help understand some of the things we talked about. The application of this knife, the division of the world into parts, and the building of the structure is something everybody does. All the time we are aware of millions of things around us, these changing shapes, these burning hills, the sound of the engine, the feel of the throttle, each rock and weed and fence and post and piece of debris beside the road, aware of these things but not really conscious of them unless there is something unusual or unless they reflect something we are predisposed to see. We could not possibly be conscious of these things or remember all of them because our mind would be so full of useless details, we would be unable to think. From all of this awareness we must select, and what we select and call consciousness is never the same as the awareness because the process of selection mutates it. We take a handful of sand from the endless landscape of awareness around us and call that handful of sand the world. Once we have the handful of sand, the world of which we are conscious, a process of discrimination goes to work on it. This is the knife. We divide the sand into parts, this and that, here and there, black and white, now and then. The discrimination is the division of conscious universe into parts. The discrimination is the division of the conscious universe into parts. A handful of sand looks uniform at first, but the longer we look at it, the more diverse we find it to be. Each grain of sand is different. No two are alike. Some are similar in one way, some are similar in another way. And we can form the sand into separate piles on the basis of this similarity and dissimilarity. Shades of color in different piles, sizes in different piles, gain shapes in different piles, subtypes of grain shapes in different piles, grades of opacity in different piles, and so on and so on and so on. You'd think the process of subdivision and classification would come to an end somewhere, but it doesn't. It just goes on and on. Classic understanding is concerned with the piles and the basis for sorting and interrelating them. Romantic understanding is directed toward the handful of sand before the sorting begins. Both are wild ways of looking at the world, and although both are valid ways of looking at the world, and although irreconcilable with each other. Both are valid ways of looking at the world, although irreconcilable with each other. What has become an urgent necessity in a way of looking at the world that does violence to neither of these two kinds of understanding and unites them into one. Such an understanding will not reject sand sorting or contemplation of unsorted sand for its own sake. Such an understanding will instead seek to direct attention to the endless landscape from which the sand has taken. That is what Phaedrus, the poor surgeon, was trying to do. To understand what he was trying to do because it was necessary to see that part of the landscape, inseparable from it, which must be understood as a figure in the middle of it, sorting the sand into piles. To see the landscape without seeing this figure, to not see the landscape at all, to reject that part of the Buddha that attends to the analysis of motorcycles, is to miss the Buddha entirely. There is a perennial classical question that asks which part of the motorcycle, which grain of sand, in which pile is the Buddha. Obviously, to ask that question is to look in the wrong direction, for the Buddha is everywhere. But just as obviously, to ask the question is to look in the right direction, for the Buddha is everywhere. About the Buddha that exists independently of any analytical thought, much has been said. Some would say too much, and would question any attempt to add to it. But above the Buddha that exists within analytic thought, gives that analytical thought its direction, virtually nothing has been said. There are historic reasons for this, but history keeps happening, and it seems no harm and maybe some positive good to add to our historical heritage with some talk in this area of discourse. When analytic thought, the knife, is applied to experience, something is always killed in the process. That is fairly well understood, at least in the arts. Mark Twain's experience comes to mind, in which, after he had mastered the analytic knowledge needed to pilot the Mississippi River, he discovered the river had lost its beauty. Something is killed. Something is always killed. But what is less noticed in the arts, something is always created too. And instead of just dwelling on what is killed, it's important to also see what's created. And instead of just dwelling on what is killed, it's important to see what's created and see the process as a kind of death-birth continuity that is neither good nor bad, just is. We pass through a town called Marmarth, but John doesn't stop even for a rest, and so we go on. More furnace heat into some Badlands and across the border into Montana. A sign by the road announces it. Sylvia waves her arms up and down, and I beat the horn in response. but when I look at the sign, my feelings are not jubilant at all. For me, its information causes a sudden inward tension that can't exist for them. They've no way of knowing what we're now in country where he lived. All this talk so far about classic and romantic understanding must seem a strangely oblique way of describing him. But to get at Phaedrus, this oblique route is the only one to take. To describe this physical appearance or the statistics of life would be to dwell on the misleading superficialities, and to come at him directly would be to invite disaster. He was insane, and when you look directly at an insane man, all you see is a reflection of your own knowledge that he's insane, which is to not see him at all. To see him, you must see what he saw when you were trying to see the vision of an insane man. An oblique route is the only way to come at it. Otherwise, your opinions block the way. There is only one axis to him that I can see as passable, and we still have a way to go. I've been going into all this business of analysis and definitions and hierarchies, not for their own sake, but to lay the groundwork for an understanding of the direction for which Phaedrus went. I told Chris the other night that Phaedrus spent his entire life pursuing a ghost. That is true. The ghost he pursued was the ghost that underlies all of technology, all of modern science, all of Western thought. It is the ghost of rationality itself. I told Chris that he had found the ghost, and that when he found it, he thrashed it good. I think in a figurative sense that is true. The things I hope to bring to light as we go along are some of the things he uncovered. Now the times are such that others may at least find them of value. No one then would see the ghost that Phaedrus pursued, but I think now that more and more people see it or get glimpses of it in bad moments, a ghost which calls itself rationality, but whose appearance is that of incoherence and meaninglessness, which causes the most normal of everyday acts to seem slightly mad because of their irrelevance to anything else. This is the ghost of normal everyday assumptions, which declares that the ultimate purpose of life, which is to keep alive, is impossible, but that this is the ultimate purpose of life anyway, so that the great minds struggle to cure diseases so that people may live longer, but only madmen ask why. One lives longer in order that he may live longer. There is no other purpose. That is what the ghost says. At Baker, where we stopped, thermometers are reading 108 degrees in the shade. When I take my gloves off, the metal of the gas tank is so hot I can't touch it. The engine is making ominous nick-nicking sounds from overheating. Very bad. The rear tires went badly too, and I could feel in my hand that it's almost as hot as the gas tank. We're going to have to slow down, I say. What? I don't think we should go over 50, I say. John looks at Sylvia, and she looks at him. Something has already been said between them about my slowness. They both look as if they've about had it. We just want to get there fast, John says, and they both walk away towards the restaurant. The chain has been running hot and dry, too. In the right-hand saddlebag, I rummage for a can of spray lubricant and find it, and start the engine and spray the moving chain. The chain is still too hot, and the solvent evaporates almost instantly. Then I squirt a little oil on it, let it run for a minute, and shut the engine off. Chris waits patiently, then follows me into the restaurant. I thought you said the big slump was going to come on the second day, Sylvia says as we approach the booth they're in. Second or third, I reply. Fourth or fifth? Maybe. She and John look at each other again, the same expression they showed before. It seems to say, there's a crowd. They may want to go ahead fast and wait for me in some town up ahead. I suggest it myself, except that if they go much faster, they won't be waiting for me in some town. It'll just be by the side of the road. I don't know how the people here stand this, Sylvia says. Well, it's hard country, I say in a little irritation. They know it's hard before they come here and are ready for it. I add, if one person complains, he just makes it that much harder for the others. They've got stamina. They know how to keep going. John and Sylvia don't say much, and John finishes Coke early and is off to a bar for a snort. I go out to check the cycle luggage again and find a new pack has been compressing a little, and so take up the slack in the ropes and retie them. Chris points to a thermometer in direct sunlight, and we can see it has gone all the way above the scale at 120 degrees. Before we are out of town, I'm sweating again. The cool drying off period doesn't even last half a minute. The heat just slams into us. Even with the dark sunglasses, I still have to squint my eyes into slits. There's nothing but burning sand and pale sky, and so bright it's hard to look anywhere. It's just become white hot everywhere, a real inferno. John up ahead is speeding faster and faster. I give up on him and slow down to 55. Unless you're just looking for trouble in this heat, you don't run tires at 85. A blowout on this stretch would really be it. I suppose they took what I said in a kind of rebuke, but I didn't have that in mind. I'm no more comfortable than they are in this heat, but there's no point in dwelling on it. All day I've been thinking and talking about Phaedrus. They must have been thinking about how bad it all this is, that's really wearing them down, the thought. Some things can be said about Phaedrus as an individual. He was knower of logic, the classical system of the system, which describes the rules and procedures of systematic thought by which analytical knowledge may be structured and irrelated. He was so swift at this. His Stanford Binet IQ, which is essentially a record of skill in analytic manipulation, was recorded at 170, a figure that occurs in only one person in 50,000. He was systematic. What to say he had thought and acted like a machine would be to misunderstand the nature of his thought. It was not like the pistons and the wheels and the gears all moving at once, massive and coordinated. The image of a laser beam comes to mind instead. A single pencil of light can be of such terrific energy in such extreme concentration it can be shot in the moon and reflected back and seen on Earth. Phaedrus did not try to use his brilliance for general illumination. He sought one specific distant target and aimed at it. And that was all. General illumination of the target he hit now seems to be left for me. In proportion to his intelligence, he was extremely isolated. There's no record of his having had close friends. He traveled alone, always. Even in the presence of others, he was completely alone. People sometimes felt this, and felt rejected by it, and so did not like him. But their dislike was not important to him. His wife and family seemed to have suffered the most. His wife, who tried to go beyond the barriers of his reserve, found themselves facing a blank. An impression that they were starved for some kind of affection which he never gave. No one really knew him. That is evidently the way he wanted it, and that's the way it was. Perhaps his aloneness was the result of his intelligence. Perhaps it was the cause. But the two were always together, an uncanny, solitary intelligence. This doesn't do it, though, because this and the image of the laser beam convey the idea that he was completely cold and unemotional. And that is not so. In his pursuit of what I have called the ghost of rationality, he was a fantastic hunter. One fragment comes especially vivid now, of a scene in the mountains where the sun, and behind the mountain itself, One fragment becomes especially vivid now of a scene in the mountains where the sun was behind the mountain itself. Half an hour, and an early twilight had changed the trees and even the rocks to almost blackened shades of blue and gray and brown. Phaedrus had been there 3 days without food. His food had run out, but he was thinking deeply and seeing things and was reluctant to leave. He was not far away from where he knew there was a road, and thus was in no hurry. In the dusk coming down the trail, he saw a movement, and then what seemed to be a dog approaching on the trail, a very large sheepdog, or an animal more like a husky. He wondered what would bring a dog like this to an obscure place at this time of evening. He disliked dogs, but the animal moved in a way that forestalled these feelings. It seemed to be watching him, judging him. Phaedrus stared into the animal's eyes for a long time, and for a moment felt some kind of recognition. Then the dog disappeared. He realized much later that it was a timber wolf. And the memory of this incident stayed with him a long time. I think it stayed with him because he had seen a kind of image of himself. A photograph can show a physical image in which time is static, and a mirror can show a physical image in which time is dynamic. But I think what he saw in the mountains was another kind of image altogether, which was not physical and did not exist in time at all. It was an image nevertheless. And it was why he felt recognition. It comes to me vividly now because I saw it again last night as the visage of Phaedrus himself. Like that timber wolf on the mountain, he had a kind of animal courage. He went his own way, and with unconcern for consequences, and sometimes stunned people, and stuns me now to hear about it. He did not often swerve to the right or to the left, I've discovered that, but this courage didn't arrive from any idealistic idea of self-sacrifice, only from the intensity of his pursuit, and there was nothing noble about it. I think this pursuit of the ghost of rationality occurred because he wanted to wreak revenge on it, because he felt himself was so shaped by it. He wanted to free himself of his own image. He wanted to destroy it because the ghost was what he wanted. Was what he was, and he wanted to be free from the bondage of his own identity. In a strange way, this freedom was achieved. This account of him must sound unworldly, but the most unworldly part of it is all yet to come. This is my own relationship to him. This has been forestalled and obscured until now, but nevertheless must be known. I first discovered him by the inference from a strange series of events many years ago. One Friday I had gone to work and gotten quite a lot done before the weekend, and was happy about that, and later drove down to a party where, after talking to everybody too long and too loudly and drinking way too much, went into a back room to lie down for a while. When I awoke, I saw that I had slept the whole night, because now it was daylight, and I thought, oh my God, I didn't even know the name of the hosts, and I wondered what sort of embarrassment this was going to lead to. The room didn't look like any room I had laid down in, but it had been dark when I came in and must have been blind drunk anyway. I got up and saw my clothes were changed. These were not the clothes I had worn the night before. I walked to the door, but to my surprise, the doorway led not to rooms of the house, but to a long corridor. As I walked down the corridor, I got an impression that everyone was looking at me. 3 different times a stranger stopped me and asked me how I felt. Thinking they were referring to my drunken condition, I replied that I didn't even have a hangover, which caused one of them to start to laugh, but then to catch himself. At a room at the end of the corridor, I saw a table where there was activity of some sort going on. I sat down nearby, hoping to remain unnoticed until I got this figured out, but a woman dressed in white came up to me and asked me if I knew her name. I read the little name clip on her blouse. She didn't see that I was doing this and seemed amazed, and walked off in a hurry. When she came back, there was a man with her, and he was looking right at me. He sat down next to me and asked me if I knew his name. I told him what it was, and was surprised as they were that I knew it. It's very early for this to be happening, he says. This looks like a hospital, I said. They agreed. How did I get here, I asked. Thinking about the drunken party, the man said nothing and the woman looked down. Very little was explained. It took me more than a week to deduce from the evidence around me that everything before my waking up was a dream and everything afterward was reality. There was no basis for distinguishing the two other than the growling pile of new events that seemed to argue against the drunk experience. Little things appeared, like the locked door at the outside, of which I could never remember seeing, and a slip of paper from the probate court telling me that some person was committed as insane. Did they mean me? It was explained to me finally that you have a new personality now. But this statement was no explanation at all. It puzzled me more than ever, and I had no awareness of any old personality. If they had said, you are a new personality, it would have been much clearer. That would have fitted. They had made a mistake of thinking of a personality as some sort of possession, like a suit of clothes which a person wears. But apart from the personality, what is there? Some bones and flesh and a collection of legal statistics, perhaps, but surely no person. The bones and flesh and legal statistics are the garments worn by the personality, not the other way around. But who was the old personality from which they had known and presumed that I was a continuation of? This is my first inkling of the existence of Phaedrus. Many years ago, in the days and weeks and years that have followed, I have learned much more. He was dead, destroyed by order of the court, and forced by the transmission of high voltage alternating current through the lobes of his brain. Approximately 800 mils of amperage at durations of 0.5 and 1.1 seconds had been applied on 28 consecutive occasions in a process known technologically as annihilation ECS. A whole personality had been liquidated without a trace in technologically faultless act that has defined our relationship ever since. I have never met him, never will. And yet the strange wisp of his memory suddenly match and fit in the road, and the desert bluffs and white-hot sand around us are in bizarre concurrence, and I know he has seen all of this. He was here, otherwise I would not know it. He had to be. In seeing these sudden coalescence of visions, and in recall of some strange fragment of thought, whose origin I have no idea of, I'm not a clairvoyant, a spirit medium receiving messages from another world. That is how it is. I see things with my own eyes, and I see things with his eyes too. He once owned them. These eyes, that is the terror of it. These gloved hands I now look at, steering the motorcycle down the road, were once his. And if you can understand the feeling that comes from that, then you can understand the real fear. The fear that comes from knowing there is nowhere you can possibly run. We enter a low-rimmed canyon. Before long, a roadside stop I've been waiting for appears. A few benches, little building, and some tiny green trees, with hoses running to their bases. John, so help me God, is the exit on the other side, ready to pull onto the highway. I ignore this and pull up by the building. Chris jumps off, and we pull the machine back up to the stand. Back up on the stand, the heat rises from the engine as if it were on fire, throwing off waves that distort everything around it. Out of the corner of my eye, I see another cycle come back. When they arrive, they are both glaring at me. Sylvia says, "We're just angry." I shrug my shoulders and walk to the drinking fountain. John says, "Where's all that stamina you were telling us about?" I look at him for a second to see if he really is angry. And I was afraid you took that too seriously, I said, and then turn away. I drink the water, and it's alkaline, like soapy water. I drink it anyway. John goes into the building to soak his shirt in water, and I check the oil level. The oil filter cap is so hot it burns my fingers right through the gloves. The engine hasn't lost much oil. The back tire treads down a little more, but it's still serviceable. The chain is tight enough, but a little dry, so I oil it again to be safe. The critical bolts are all tight enough. John comes over dripping with water and says, "You go ahead this time. We'll stay behind." "I won't go fast," I say. "That's all right," he said. "We'll get there." So I go ahead and we take it slowly. The road through the canyon doesn't straighten out into more of what we've been through, as I expected it would, but starts to wind upward. Surprise. Now the road meanders a little and cuts back away from the direction in which we should be going, then returns. Soon it rises a little, and then rises some more, and we're moving in angular directions into narrow devil's gaps, then upward again, higher and a little higher each time. Some shrubs appear, then small trees, and the road goes higher still into grass, then fenced meadows. Overhead a small cloud appears. Rain, perhaps? Perhaps. Meadows must have rain, and these now have flowers in them. Strange how all this has changed. Nothing to show it on the map, and the consciousness of memory has disappeared too. Phaedrus must not have come this way, but there is no other road. Strange, it keeps rising upward. The sun angles towards the cloud, which now has grown downward to touch the horizon above us, in which there are trees, pines, and a cold wind comes down with the pine smells from the trees. The flowers in the meadow blow in the wind, and the cycle leans a little, and we are suddenly cool. I look at Chris and he is smiling. I am smiling too. And the rain comes hard on the road with a gust of earth smell from the dust and has waited for too long, and the dust beside the road is pocketed with the first raindrops. This is all so new. We are so in need of it. A new rain. My clothes become wet. The goggles are spattered, and the chills start to feel delicious. The cloud passes from beneath the sun, and the forest and the pines and the small meadows gleam again, sparkling from where the sunlight catches small drops from the rain. We reach the top of the climb, dry again but cool now, and stop, overlooking a huge valley and river below. I think we've arrived, John says. Sylvia and Chris have walked into the meadow among the flowers under pines through which I can see the far side of the valley, away and below. I am a pioneer now, looking into the promised land.